Good evening. My name is Kathy Behrend, and I've had the great opportunity and privilege to be on the Board of Trustees of the 92nd Street Y for over 3.5 decades. So, yes, I was very young when I came on. So, as you may know, the 92nd Street Y gave birth 7 years ago to Giving Tuesday, which was actually last Tuesday. So far, it has raised in the United States $511 million in the U.S., and offline donations are estimated to be $1.4 billion. 60 countries are involved in Giving Tuesday movements. So the Y is a community center. It's global, but also very local. Just like the generosity of spirit in the DNA of the Y, so it is in our country. De Tocqueville in the mid-1800s observed that our young nation and its people had its roots in inclination to form associations for the betterment of others. Also, our tax code essentially stands alone in the world in its tax deduction for donations. One often ponders, how does one learn to be charitable? How does one understand philanthropy? For many, it is through one's family or one's religious affiliation, or for some enduring passion for a cause or an organization. But we should not take for granted that philanthropy will just be picked up or magically communicated. I have been fortunate to know Fiduciary Trust Company International, Gail and John, for many years, and suggested that Fiduciary might consider partnering with the Y on a program on legacy planning. Both institutions have a shared perspective on values embedded in giving. I would like to thank Fiduciary for its support and also thank Melanie and Doug of the Y for imagining this program. To further introduce the topic, I turn to John Dowd. He is the Chief Executive Officer of Fiduciary Trust. John is also a member of the Franklin Templeton Management Committee. The Templeton Fund has been a very, very generous contributor to the Y and actually funded our Genius series, if any of you remember that, 7 Days of Genius. With over 30 years of extensive wealth management experience at several banks, John also finds time to serve on the board of Big Brother, Big Sister New York and the Montclair Art Museum. John Dowd.
Thank you, Kathy, and the whole Behrend family. And my gosh, that is the service here at the Y. The many years that you've spent here is just a great. It's just a great testament to your giving. So good evening. My name is John Dowd. I am the CEO of Fiduciary Trust Company International, and I'd like to welcome everyone here tonight to our event of Dream It Up and Pass It Down, a special conversation on wealth planning for and with the next generation. I think our location here tonight is very appropriate because the Y here at 92nd Street for 145 years has been a great place for families to gather as a community. And for the last 35 years with the talk series that are now world famous, it's an ability to host a community together and tackle some issues that can be a little bit challenging. And I think tonight's subject is a little bit challenging. So as CEO of Fiduciary Trust, which is founded here in New York in 1931, we are one of the largest specialized trust companies in the world. And myself, along with Gail, our chair, we've had a front row seat to the challenges, the do's and don'ts of effectively planning and making charitable giving, and then also how to educate the next generation. There is a Money Magazine article that has, when I look at it, was a little sobering when I was thinking about this subject. According to Money Magazine, 70% of the wealthy families will lose a significant portion of their wealth in the second generation and 90% by the third. Two other troubling stats stick out. 78% of the present generation feel that the next gen is not equipped to handle an inheritance, let alone charitable giving. And 64% of the present generation have disclosed little to nothing about their wealth to the next generation. So we definitely have an issue in this country about education as to wealth and setting up as to what charitable intent should be. Tonight's panel is going to help shed some light on some of the best practices and how to avoid key pitfalls. Now, I'm very excited to introduce tonight's moderator, Emily Tish Sussman. Emily is the host of Your Primary Playlist, which should be on everybody's, it should be everybody's definitive guide to the 2020 primary season. And by the way, it's available on Apple Podcasts right now, and I know Emily would not be offended if you pulled it up and added it from the App Store. Emily is a leading political strategist with over 150 appearances across the cable news spectrum. So not just one voice, but she's covered it all. She is the recipient of a number of awards, including the Truman Values Award from the Truman National Security Project, the We Are Emily Award from Emily's List, and the Alumni of the Decade from Benjamin Cardozo School of Law, where she earned her JD. She lives in New York with her husband and her 2 children. And by the way, she showed me a picture of her home office, and I think it should be on workingmom.com. One of her kids is around, probably doing their own podcast. Please give a warm welcome to Emily Tish Sussman.
Thank you so much, John, and thank you to the Y for hosting this conversation. You illuminated all the reasons that it's important that we have this conversation, although it might be challenging at moments. I know that we have the experts here to work through it. Just on a point of personal privilege, it is really a privilege to be here here in New York, here at the Y, where I grew up, where my family has been involved for a long time. Philanthropy was a very strong part of our upbringing, started with my grandparents and from my parents. My grandparents really very strongly instilled in us that we had a great responsibility towards those that were in need, towards our country, and especially towards our city, because we were privileged with growing up with so much. And we really took that to heart, and it's manifested itself very differently in every person in my family. For me, that meant going into where do I feel like I could make the most impact. It felt like government. And so going in and trying to change laws and become an advocate and try to organize, that was what it meant for me. And actually a piece of why I started going on TV was because I realized that I could say things that other people may not feel like they had the liberty to say if they were worried about getting their next job, or if they were an elected official and they were worried about who they might be offending. That actually was something that I didn't have to worry about as much. And so I felt like I had a liberty to say more and be bolder and push the envelope. It has manifested itself in all sorts of different ways, which we're going to hear about from our incredible panel today. So we're going to talk a little bit up here, but then we also want to hear from you, from the audience. We know that you have come in with burning questions, and more may come up over the course of the conversation. So we have notes. You will get notes. So people will be coming up and down the aisle throughout. If you want to write down a note and hand it to them, we'll end with a couple minutes at the end to go through Q&As. I'll give you a reminder of when we'll be collecting them at the end. So I want to go through our incredible panel, starting with Gail Cohen. Gail is the chair of Fiduciary Trust's Board of Directors and General Trust Counsel. She has over 30 years of experience in the area of trusts and estates and is a member of Fiduciary Trust Management and Operating Committees and is the chair of Fiduciary Trust International of the South. Let's give her a warm welcome. Patricia Angus is the founder and CEO of Angus Advisory Group, LLC, and an adjunct professor at Columbia University, where she directs its family business program. A thought leader in multi-generational family governance and wealth, she has advised families with businesses, trusts, and charitable foundations for more than 25 years. Let's give her a welcome. Justin Rockefeller is the Global Director of Family Offices and Foundations at, how do you say it? ADAPAR, thank you. Justin is also co-founded and chairs The Impact, a membership network of families who are committed to making investments with measurable social impact. Let's welcome him. Well, thank you all so much for being here. I actually would like to start with the same question for all of you. So we're going to go right on down the line here. But what trends are we seeing now? You each work in this space in different aspects. What are the things that are emerging as trends, especially given the background of what John described?
Wow. The trends we're seeing, I would say, and Gail and I have known each other for a very long time in this field, and I would say one of the trends is defining the field is getting harder. So you used to have a field that had investments, it had law, it had accounting, it had philanthropy, it had planned giving, and everything was sort of siloed. And now I would say the lines are getting blurred and things are much more integrated in the way that families are thinking about it and the way that the industry is thinking about it. So I would say that people are not distinguishing between how do I invest and how do I give. They're sort of combining that. It's a major trend. I would also say the acceleration of wealth, especially in the last 10 years, has really sped up some of the really complicated issues of what it means to hold the magnitude of wealth that some families are holding today and the control they have through their businesses and through their philanthropy, and what does that mean in the world. So I'd say we're living in a very exciting, challenging time, and the field is integrating around it.
So I would approach this question with the from the perspective of the family, and what I'm seeing with families who have philanthropic missions. Maybe they have a foundation that they work with, or they have specific goals. And what I see is that the trends that I see are that when the families are younger and concentrating on generating wealth, creating wealth, and the children are still young, growing up, going to school, there's a lot less emphasis on the philanthropy piece of it. And as our clients age, they tend to really focus more on philanthropy, that this is actually their legacy and the way they think about what they're going to leave in the world when they're no longer there. So it's sort of a flip in how people approach their wealth. So we see families who are thinking about how do we educate our children, how do we educate the next generation to allow for them to take over the mission, whether it be their own mission of the creator of the wealth, or perhaps giving the children their own missions that are different than what the creator of the wealth has. So, in fact, I was working with a family last week where this is exactly their question to me was, how do we get the children who are in their 50s, of course, how do we get the children to integrated into this foundation, which is quite large, where the matriarch has been basically guiding all of the mission and all of the grants, and now she would like her two sons to come in, and they have very different missions. Her mission was one that was very local to where she lives. They have local missions to where they live, which is not the same place. She's interested in children, they're interested in the environment. So we worked on a governance plan to allow for each of the children to have their own missions, but yet staying together as a family in the same foundation, where they all had to ponder what the grants would be. And so not breaking up the foundation, but keeping it together, but allowing each to have their own say in what happens, but yet so have the independence but still be together. So those are the types of things that I'm seeing in the industry right now.
Like Gail, I would also address this from the perspective of sort of a smaller survey of families. Who I work a lot with families through ADAPAR and the impact. And the trend that I'm seeing, especially among women and millennials, is a sort of a keen desire to think about the moral impacts of how they invest, right? Realizing that every investment and thus every company has positive and negative impacts. But when you track what those impacts are and you reflect on how they relate to your values, investing becomes not just something that you do in the background or blindly, but that you becomes more interesting. And I think that's in part from a realization that there are certain challenges that are seemingly intractable. Think of climate change, access to basics like water and opportunity and food and education, healthcare. And it's so daunting to think about how we can tackle these. And philanthropy has some scale, maybe 500, 600 billion given annually in the US. That's a big number, but it's a very small numerator over the much larger denominator of the scale of the capital markets, maybe 200 trillion. So government is also not really inspiring people today that you can affect a lot of change at the federal level anyway. That's not so true at the state and city level. But people are now, younger people are turning to the capital markets and saying there has to be a better way for capitalism to work. The financial crisis was not okay. Capitalism was not working at its best. And because of these challenges, we need the scale and the efficiency of the capital markets to address them. So we better make business work better. And when capitalism works better, democracy works better. So they don't maybe lay it out in such philosophical terms. However, this is a clear trend across families that this line of thinking is resonating.
That was very helpful. And I think you all gave us a good landscape of how people are starting to approach it. I think now it would be helpful to think about, just to help us to understand the stakeholders in this and the different roles and how the stakeholders are evolving. You had alluded to this, Gail. But Patricia, I'd like to ask you about kind of the stakeholder landscape. Like if we think about philanthropy as one piece of it, you spoke about the different lanes. Can you just sort of elaborate on your first answer? Like, how are people seeing the different lanes intersect? You're saying they're all kind of coming together now.
Sure, I can say that when I got out of college a very long time ago, and I really had a passion to make a difference in the world, as most people coming out of college do, and I decided to go to law school like you did to sort of further that. I was told very clearly, you're either going to go into nonprofit or you're going to go into for-profit. And there was really no in between. And I was told, go private sector before public sector, because if you start in the public sector, you're never going to make it to the private sector. And it's fascinating.
Sounds very familiar.
Right? Yeah. And I love now, up at Columbia, when I teach a couple of my students, former students are here, and I love now that they don't really have that distinction. It's not so black and white on an individual basis, and it's not so black and white on a global basis either. I was teaching something on governance a couple years ago, and I thought, well, I really need to go back to the books and research governance, right? And I talk a lot about how governance is guiding and steering. It's not just boring rules and policies, that you really need to know your guiding principles, that James Madison, not only was he an expert in Latin and Greek and a translator of Ovid and all of the, the classics, he stayed in college an extra year to learn Hebrew. So, there was a time when government had this lofty purpose to it. You had people who were guided by principles, and you had a belief in government. So if you think of the World War II generation, everybody, regardless of political party, was still committed to the country. I think our country and all countries today are having a crisis of governance. So I think that there is this question of how are we collectively making decisions for the good of the whole. And I think it's about the social contract. The social contract was I give up some freedom because we're all going to be better off. So that's sort of, I would say, our underlying, sort of what's going on. It's probably why you have a session upstairs on is there a civil revolution coming? Because that's sort of the world we're living in. We don't know how we're governing ourselves. Then you throw on philanthropy, and philanthropy does an amazing part of social service, but it can't take up everything that government can't do. And so I think there is this challenge now where we're almost putting too much pressure on philanthropy to solve society's problems without accountability, and then families are feeling like, oh my God, how much can I do in this environment? So that's a very long answer to your question, but I think it's a complicated time that we are in because government is under pressure and it's under attack. Philanthropy is a big part of it, but it's also being changed from grant making to investing, and then the question is, what is investing and what is true philanthropy for society's good? And then you have families who are saying, my God, we have resources and we want to work together as family members. What do we do? So it's a complicated time, but it's also a creative time. So going back to when I looked up governance, basically what they're saying now at the UN level is that really the way that things are getting decided is through stakeholder engagement as opposed to top-down government rules. So you have people getting together like the Al Gores of the world saying, we're going to change climate change, we're not waiting for the government. So it's a huge opportunity for the private philanthropist in that area. And we still use terms philanthropist. You could use whatever term you want, but it's somebody who, on the private side of the equation, is giving.
So Gail, I do want to think about the specific stakeholders. You know, you spoke about this, about how the family changes and how the decision makers and then can sometimes be changing. And maybe the decision makers are trying to encourage others to become decision makers. But they also have a different relationship as stakeholders, even if they're not the decision makers yet, even if they may be one day. Mm-hmm. So can you just help us understand how people are approaching the question of stakeholders and what creative solutions they're using?
So, you know, there's so many different ways in which they approach that, right? There's and I know Justin alluded to this whole notion of investing and investing your foundation assets and your all of your assets. And I can speak for in the wealth management industry, for example, and there's a huge movement right now to make sure that investments are socially responsible. And I can tell you that at our firm, at Franklin Templeton, every single one of our stocks gets put through a screen to make sure that it is appropriate from an environmental, social, and governance perspective. So there's an ESG screen that we put all of our securities through. And there's two reasons for that. One is the stakeholders themselves are looking for that. Our clients are asking for that. They want to make sure that they're investing in a way that furthers their own goals. But secondly, from an investment perspective, these are the companies that are going to survive. These are the companies that have the growth potential. So actually, it's a good investment strategy to look for this type of responsibility in a company, and that's why we do it. So, and on top of it, I see a lot of companies. There's a huge need and thrust to do more as a global citizen at a corporate level. So I see this, for example, at Franklin Templeton as well. We have somebody we had our all-employee meeting today, and there's a woman who is the head of global citizenship. That is her title. And her responsibility is to make sure that we stay engaged in our communities around the world. So we have, we're in hundreds of countries. We gave an award today for somebody who is most philanthropic, or not most philanthropic, but they get nominated by their peers. There were 3 candidates, 3 finalists, 2 from India and 1 from St. Petersburg, Florida. And the reward was that the woman from St. Petersburg, Florida, won the award, and recognizing all of her contributions, she had created a charity to collect school supplies for foster children and impoverished children in her county and in Florida. And it had gained all this steam. She did it all by herself. And so there's a $15,000 grant to her charity as well. So I mean, this is the kind of thing, and this was what our meeting was about today. In other words, we talked about the markets, we talked about the company, all that, but really the thrust of the meeting was the good that we're doing in the community, and that is what I think we see more of that.
So Justin, I'd like to build on this idea of investments as being a part of it, socially conscious investments. I mean, you're part of a 5th-generation family known for wealth preservation and philanthropy. And we heard from John, this is not so common. So how does your family approach this? How do they approach wealth planning?
In 5 seconds or less.
Yeah, length of an answer.
Yeah, we're 7 generations into this now, so there was some thought put into this. So the low-hanging fruit here, there were various trusts set up, right? Those trusts have independent forms of governance, so that family members are not in charge of distributing to each other or to themselves, right? Some basic low-hanging fruit there, but there has become a culture of not being ostentatious in terms of wealth. that would almost be unthinkable in terms of the reaction if someone were to, be very, very flashy in some way and be loud about their wealth. So that culture has actually helped in that respect. I think people have led by example, that you have an obligation. This is written on that plaque in front of Rock Center, right? Sort of a variation of to whom much is given, much is expected. That family members, almost without exception, are involved in their communities, involved in giving in some respect. But interestingly, now there's been a real trend towards this idea of values-aligned investing because the math is changing, right? My grandfather's generation, the third generation, could come up with the idea of an institution, endow that institution, hire a great team, and they're off and running. That's no longer an option financially for us. We want to have as much impact as prior generations, but we also are at the point where we are thinking about how to make money to further the impact. And those are not two buckets like they used to be, right? The business bucket and the philanthropy bucket. So values-aligned investing, often called impact investing, allows you to think about the type of impact that you want to have in the world. And if it goes well, depends on the business model, but the more your company or investment grows, the more positive impact it will have. That should be a healthy relationship rather than contrary.
Zach?
Yeah, and if I can sort of give a little perspective, I'm thinking back 10 years ago when I had a client, and many of my clients were beneficiaries of maybe the third or fourth generation of trusts that had been established by their forebears. And I would get these requests because I was the first line to the client, and the beneficiaries would say, we want to have this out of oil stocks. We want to have it out of fossil fuels. We want to have it apartheid, whatever it was. And so I would quietly go over to the investment team, and I did this up when I was working at a firm that will remain unnamed, and I said, okay, we really need to change the portfolio for this client. This is really important. And the investment person said, we won't make any money that way. It hasn't been proven. It's not going to happen. And this was 10 years ago. And I was getting tons of demands from clients all the time about this. And I just thought, okay, you're going to lose the client. That's your problem. But you're missing this whole trend. Now today, the ability to filter and the ability to look strategically has changed so much that I think it's taking off even faster than anybody would have expected 5 or 10 years ago. I just looked at a chart. I used it in class just 2 days ago about the rise of social investment, socially responsible investing, and from 2016 or 17, it was a hockey stick. It just went straight up. The challenge for all of you is to make sure that the investments are still good and that the societal impact is good, because I do worry about the bubble out there of people who are hiding poor returns and saying we're doing good in the world. You got to be sure what you're actually getting.
That feels like a really important point.
Having seen that from the client side of the table. Yeah.
Right. And so, Gail, can you actually build on this for us? I mean, this is everything we're talking about is pretty emotional. Like it's not just the bottom line, but it's that people are bringing their values into it, and therefore it is an emotional choice for them as well as a good business decision. But could you help us understand where people are coming to this place emotionally?
I think that they're very much thinking about this a lot for the reasons that I sort of already spoke about, is that this is where their legacy is going to be. And I think that as people, as the baby boomers are aging, and even the Gen X's are aging, and the silent generation is already aged, becoming very silent.
It's so dark in here.
I know. This is what happens. It's truly a notion of what will people remember me for, and as we all know, that's the most important aspect of living, is what you've left when you leave the world. And so that's, I think, the most fundamental emotional tie there is. And they want to do, they've got, their principles there, and they want to do the right thing. So I think that's really, that's what I would say.
Well, what about also for the later generations that are coming in? Are there conflicted feelings, especially if they're not maybe holding the same values as the ones who established it?
I think there can be, but one of the most important things for the original stakeholder, the older generation, is to remember that their values can't be and shouldn't be imposed on the next generation. The next generation has to be allowed to have their own values, and and there needs to be flexibility to accomplish that. Back last week when I was sitting with this family, the matriarch had thought her mission would go on forever. She did, and she actually thought that we'll keep my mission as the core mission. And then you guys can, that's a third, and forever, and you guys have your 2/3. And by the end of the meeting, she said, you know what, my mission will no longer be important when I'm not here, and you should be dividing the two missions. So it's that realization, and for people who actually are self-made, giving up control is very difficult, very, very difficult for them. So that is part of the educational process that we go through.
I mean, what you're talking about is not, it might happen over the course of one meeting or many meetings, but this is like some deep, emotional family.
And this family had done a lot of thinking about it already. This was my first meeting with them, and we came to a lot of decisions, but they had already been doing a lot of thinking, so they all came with their own ideas. It wasn't like this was the first time we were presenting ideas. And it was a very productive meeting, and I think my jaw did drop. And Paulina was in the room too when he said, she said, my mission is not going to be relevant after a few years. We'll just trail it off. So.
It sounds like they had a pretty good conclusion, but what happens if they're not willing to, let go of control, which sounds hard.
Yeah, it takes a very long time for people to let go, and I think that that I could see where a parent might say, I'm not willing to give this up for my children. And they might, there are options, and I discuss those with the clients. I say you can create a field of interest fund with a community foundation, and they'll continue your mission through the field of interest fund if that's what you want. But most of the time, the private foundation is created. One of the big reasons that they create a foundation is so that the family will stay together. And so that's not really what they want. And I think they come to recognize that in order to keep the family together, each family member has to be an individual and have their own individual goals and be fulfilled. Otherwise, they'll split it up and they won't work together.
It feels like an extra layer of complications and what can already be complicated family dynamics.
That's right.
So, Justin, I want to talk about your nonprofit impact. So it helps family enterprises make more effective impact investments. You spoke about your family's history and the evolution and the culture. Were you influenced by your own family's experience when founding it? Were you thinking of your own family?
Well, there's certainly, as I learned about family history, there's certainly some impressive examples of both capitalism and philanthropy, and impact investing somewhat sits at the intersection of those two things. So it was easy to build upon that notion. The origins go back to, and I'll give a quick anecdote. Something that happened with the type of family foundation that Gail was just referencing. This one called Rockefeller Brothers Fund that was founded in 1940. And this is a foundation largely focused on fighting climate change. There are other programs as well, but about almost 50% of the charitable giving goes to fighting climate change. And so I was on the board and the investment committee for 9 years. And long story short, we decided to announce publicly that we were going to divest of fossil fuels and instead invest in managers whose work aligns with our mission. And the timing was nice. We did this when oil was $106 a barrel, so it became a good financial decision, but the reasons were more morally driven. And we also recognized that the surname Rockefeller attached to the foundation was a tool that we could leverage to, maybe pardon the pun, but add fuel to that conversation, right? Bring attention to the matter. And when this really got more attention than we were anticipating. And a lot of families reached out and asked, hey, this is pretty interesting that you're doing this, but are you compromising returns? No, we're handily beating the benchmark, but what's working, what's not working? And so a group of impact investors and I had been working together, and we realized there should be a safe space for families. So we created a version of the Giving Pledge, which is focused on philanthropy, but instead the focus of the impact, make the pact as opposed to take the pledge, is on investing and how to align your values and your investments, and families working with each other through the network that we've created, through educational materials that we've published, and through the data platform actually powered by Adipar, where I work, so that people can learn from each other both in person and when they're not in person. And that transparency facilitates the flow of capital to these businesses, creating measurable social and environmental impact.
Do you find that people are using it mostly for their foundation's investing, or they're doing it with their personal investments as well?
Combination. So we have members who run family businesses where they're very wealthy, but 95% of the family wealth is tied up in the family position, right? Wealth is created in a concentrated position, and they're looking to preserve wealth through diversification. So as they diversify, they're looking for impact-oriented opportunities, or to inject impact practices into the running of their family business. Other members are sort of older families, more diversified across asset classes, and so they're trading notes with each other. How do you do this by asset class, by sector, by strategy even, by return profile, by geography? So we make it easy for them to trade notes with each other, regardless of the family structure or approach.
You know, I just wanted to say one thing, and going back to Justin's comments before, you really exemplified what we're talking about with mission. So you said that this Rockefeller Brothers was started in 1940, and half of its grants go to climate change. There was no such thing as nobody knew what climate change was in 1940, right? So you need to have that flexibility to allow for your foundation to take on the issues that are of the day. Anyway, it was just a beautiful sort of segue into that.
No, it's true. We revisit the mission every 10 years.
Mm-hmm. Perfect.
It's good governance.
Yes, really good governance. Excellent.
So we will keep chatting for another couple of minutes, but we also want to hear from you all. So this is a last call to pass your cards up to questions, and then we'll start getting them. What was it? The chief? Who is the chief impact officer?
Global citizenship.
Global citizenship.
Global citizenship.
Okay, so this is a great example of how you actually have to structure your organization and your staff towards what your clients are looking for now, the impact investing. So actually, Patricia, I'd love to ask you, how do you structure yourself for this? Now, does everybody have a global impact officer? It sounds like.
They just don't know it, but yeah. Just like everybody has a family office, but they don't call it that. They have somebody who's doing family office work. They just don't have a formal structure around it. Does everybody, is that the question? Does everybody have a chief impact officer?
Well, how do you structure your staff towards this? Like, have you had to actually, you've really helped us understand how it's not clear lanes of work of investing, of philanthropy, but how do you structure your staff now?
Right.
And your organization?
Well, In my organization, it's virtual, and so I have staff that that help me on the administrative side. But I'm a consultant who works with a small number of families, and it used to be a larger number of families. And then I founded the program at Columbia, and I realized I can't teach all these classes, and I can't consult as much as I used to. But when I consult to families, I bring in the right people. So actually, I partner with Fiduciary on quite a few. Pauline and I were on a call earlier this week discussing all of the issues we've talked about today with that client. So I think you're probably asking about clients more than my own structuring. But my own structuring is an example of where the world is going. And I did this 10 years ago intentionally. I don't believe that you can have everybody under one roof who can cover everything the client needs. And I think that's really important for families to remember. Fiduciary certainly understands it. I understand it. I'm sure, Justin, you can't find everybody in one place, right? And so if you are a family who is trying to structure itself around these issues, I do believe there's never a single leader in a family. You often have more than one leader. One person's running the business, another person's running the philanthropy. There's more places of leadership in a family than people give credit for. So I think that what I have found in the past, say 25, 30 years ago, you would have a member of the family, often a woman, who had a degree in like foundation work or nonprofit management, and then the family would set up a foundation, and they would have the head of the business run the foundation, or they would have their lawyer run the foundation, and they would have a resource in the family that they didn't acknowledge. And so families acknowledging the resources they have, that was an extreme example, but we saw it a lot. I think families have to figure out, how do we understand what's our human capital, what do we all have as resources individually, what do we have collectively, and what do we need to get from the outside. You cannot delegate decision making about your most important things. You can't have your lawyer decide what your legacy is going to be. And you can't have your investment person decide what your values are. You can't have your tax advisor decide whether you're really going to give to charity or not. So I think actually every family needs to figure out for itself whether they're going to do things individually or collectively. Once you figure out collectively how you're going to govern that, and then once you've figured out, say you're going to do the philanthropic side of it, I loved Gail's story, because the other side, that's the, do you keep the mission across generations? I had a client who created a pool that he was going to have his family give money from. And they all decided on a mission, because I had told them you should have a mission and you don't want to all fight over your passions. So they had a mission, and let's just say it was animal welfare. And the next time I said, every quarter you have a meeting and you come in with your grant proposal and you figure out you've checked out the site and you're going to convince your family to give to this. And he comes in and he says, there's a new art museum in town. I think we should give to it. And the family was silent. And they were in like their 20s, 30s, maybe early 40s. And he looked at them and he said, well, what's wrong? And finally one said, that's not the mission we agreed on. And he said, oh. And then we had taught them to, do stuff individually and as a group. And so we said, you could do that on your own, but not in our group pool. Fine. So we left, we were in the kitchen later, and he claims that I said it, I claim he said it. He said, I created a democracy, I guess I have to live with it. That's what people forget.
And so I'd actually love to ask you the same question. Is it how do you structure, how long have you had the impact officer for? Like, is it relatively new?
So that's a good question. This particular one, but she's the second one that we've had. So she's been in this role for about a year now, and we've had somebody in that role for several years before that. But it was slightly different. I don't think it had that name, and that was the person who sort of was the gatekeeper for the charitable giving for the organization, right? So most organizations have a charitable fund, and so she was the gatekeeper for that for many, many, many years. And so this is a fairly, I would say, with this mission is a fairly new position. But the company itself has a long history of giving, and but it really has been ramped up, I must say. I think we've logged almost 6,000 volunteer hours among our staff this year. So
it also depends not just on having the positions, like having them is important, but also what responsibilities you give them.
And we, for example, we pay people to volunteer. We have paid volunteer days. You're allowed to take off a day to volunteer, and you do not sacrifice pay. It's not a vacation day. It's not a personal day. It's actually a paid day. So there's all sorts of built-in incentives to volunteer your time.
That feels incredibly important, especially in terms of leveling the playing field.
Yep.
So really, I think it goes to the culture.
And by the way, I mean, and because I'm older, I can say this, I think, that it also helps attract and retain talent, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't something that I looked for when I was looking for a job, but it is something that many people today are looking for when they're looking for a job. So I think it's important to have that, not just for selfish reasons, really.
Look, that's something that we hear from CEOs across the board, that younger people want to align values with their workplace, with their job definition, with the environment they're in, and so it does help attract and retain talent. So Justin, how do you think, you run a nonprofit, you have a company, like, how do you think that it is, do you believe that to be true? That you are attracting and retaining talent because of the mission? And does the talent then line up? Like, does that help you basically to attract, I guess, clients? I'm not sure how you categorize them.
Right. So Gail earlier referenced this concept of ESG, right? And think of ESG as a risk framework, and there are some big dangers coming in the future. So you want to evaluate a company with some of those concepts in mind. How will certain companies respond to climate change? If you're a mining company, what's your relationship with water, right? What could go wrong? These are risk categories and characteristics you want to incorporate. In a similar way, companies need to think about retaining and attracting talent. And if you are not offering positive solutions for employees, then that is a risk factor for client retention or talent retention and attraction. So very much that's the case. And I'm not an expert across generations. I'm a Gen Xer, but there's been a lot of focus on millennials. And going back to my earlier remarks, it really does seem to be just inherently understood in many younger people that how you make money, how you invest money, how you earn money, and how you donate money all have moral consequences. And so I feel, as a painting with a broad brushstroke, that younger people who care about these things, who are working at companies, who are volunteering at nonprofits, prioritize that concept, right? They want to work for and associate themselves with places that they view as making the world a better place.
So we have some great questions from the audience and some real specific questions that we're starting with. So I got a specific question right up top that I love. So how best, I think this is really, Patricia and Gail, both clients, but Justin, jump right on in here. So how best to educate our children about wealth, and what ages give it to them, and under what conditions, so as not to mess them up? Something that is on all of our minds.
So, well, I'm going to start, and then you can jump in. Let me start with the sort of how to educate. And one of the great ways that I've seen clients educating their children about wealth and about financial education in general is through philanthropy. And so perhaps there's a foundation, and they can bring their children on board, and they can start educating them about the investments. They'll look at the statements together, and they understand what are stocks, what are bonds, what are mutual funds, what are private equity, all of these things. They'll get to learn, they get to see returns over time. There are some families where the foundation might be too large, and they don't really want to expose the child yet to that kind of wealth. They might create a donor-advised fund, which might be smaller, that they can use to help the child learn, and also give them responsibility for making grants and coming through. And so that's, I think, one technique that I've seen very successfully used. And you maybe talk about other things.
I'm thinking about, there were sort of three questions in there, right? How do you tell them, when do you tell them, and how do you not mess them up?
Right.
So I have worked on this for 30 years now, and I've come to some conclusions on this. How you tell them is far more important than when you tell them. and you may have already messed them up. So be careful about that part of it. So how you tell them has to be in a framework, has to be values-based, has to be more sort of contextual. The worst thing you can do is what was done to people our generation was, go to the lawyer when you're 18 and then you find out how big your account is. That is not the way to do it. Do not hide things from your children. It doesn't mean that when they're 15 you say, hey, we're worth $20 million. I don't think the numbers matter so much if you've done it right, and you have to do it over time, and you have to start openly admitting your own vulnerability. Now, that's the radical part that I need to say. From my experience, most people who are saying, I'm worried about my kids, they're worried about themselves, actually, because they may not have processed their relationship and their feelings about wealth to begin with. Either they've made it very fast themselves, they've inherited from their family in a shrouded in secrecy situation, or somehow they just haven't processed it themselves. Until the parents process it, it's very hard for the kids to feel comfortable. So I'll tell you one quick story when I was hired for this. And in terms of the age and the amount, do not tell amounts when kids are young, but they know already. I mean, this is the Google age, right? So I was hired to teach some kids about this. The parents first wouldn't let me meet the kids because they were so worried themselves that I would tell the kids something, like it was like, this is a taboo. And so in that process, I finally got to the point where they said, okay, we're going to have a meeting and our children are going to come and we're going to do it the day after Christmas. And I said, well, I usually take the week off after Christmas. I celebrate Christmas. If you promise me that you will be there and it is worth my taking the week off I take every year, of course I'll do it for you. Christmas Eve comes, I get a phone call. Our son met a new girl. He really wants to go skiing with her. We're really sorry, we're not having the meeting. And I thought, you just taught her everything you need to know about entitlement and privilege and responsibility, and there's nothing I can do to undo that. You can't delegate these things, and yet you're probably over your head, so get some education yourself and learn it together. Sorry, that was a long story, but yeah.
A very illuminating one. A great story, Justin.
Yeah.
Briefly, Warren Buffett has a way with words. He said, I'm going to leave my children enough money so that they feel like they can do anything, but not so much money that they feel like they can do nothing.
Here's another great question. Do you find that fewer families are forming foundations and instead choosing to create donor-advised funds?
$25.1 billion went into donor-advised funds last year. I just heard this. You can answer them.
So, yeah, I'd say yes to that for a variety of reasons. But again, it depends on size. It's really a size-driven equation for clients who are creating huge, massive endowments, and they want to have a foundation. That makes sense. But otherwise, I think you're seeing donor-advised funds as being the vehicle of choice for the smaller, $1 million to $5 million. I think people are really choosing the donor-advised fund.
Even larger it's happening too, because people don't really want the administrative complexity.
And for very wealthy individuals where they have huge foundations, often they create a donor-advised fund also because they have a 5% payout that they need to make from their foundation every year, and you can make part of that to your donor-advised fund if you can't spend the whole 5% or you want to save it up for something big. You can do that through your donor-advised fund.
Here's another good question. How do your clients evaluate the organizations that are the recipients of the monies donated? I guess it's kind of a personal question, but Justin, I feel like you're well equipped to answer this.
Did you see me reaching for my microphone? In finance, there's a perfect unifying unit called the dollar, right, or whatever currency. That's helpful for normalizing, various factors. In philanthropy and giving, there are many forms of impact. There are multiple impacts, both positive and negative. So tracking it becomes difficult. And impact investing is sort of in the third or fourth inning of this whole idea of measurement. It's still coming together. Philanthropy is much further along, and there's still a healthy debate about all this. But ultimately, there really are very dramatic differences in the worthiness of causes and also the effectiveness of organizations within those verticals or those causes. There is a sentiment out there that, you know, it's important to give, and that's okay. If someone's giving, that's enough. I think that's not enough. You really need to pay attention to what causes matter. You can think about things like tractability, how solvable is an issue, how important is the issue, what's the scale of that issue, and how neglected is that issue. And if you think about those three things, that's probably a good place to start in terms of what type of cause to think about. And even within that, there are plenty of organizations, GiveWell is a very prominent one, that rate and provide they track organizations that do third-party, disinterested third-party reviews of their work, and really the effects are dramatic. Some organizations are 1,000x or 500 times more effective than others. So this is sort of a notion called effective altruism. And your dollars really can go much further if you're thoughtful about where they go.
So I was pulling out some stats. There are something like 10 million NGOs in the world, which are basically the equivalent of our nonprofits. And there's 86,000 private foundations. And I'm thinking about when I did a training to become a nonprofit board member. And at the end of it, we were supposed to choose which board we wanted to be on and how we were going to work that out. And there was an investment banker who was also a member of this training program. And we walked out of it, and she turned to me and she said, "This industry is ripe for consolidation." There were way too many nonprofits out there. We talked about this in class just yesterday, and one of my students is getting a degree in nonprofit management, and she said all the professors are telling everybody, don't start a nonprofit. There are plenty already. And I think it's a challenge because people believe their passion, and then they want to create something, and then you as donors have to figure out, is that really the best way to get this done? And how can you get them to work together? And how can you get some leverage out of that? So in terms of the how do you choose it, I think for better or worse, most of us start with the end in mind. We say, oh, I love this new organization, and it was founded by my college roommate, and I'm so passionate about it, as opposed to saying what I care about, why I care about it, what my theory of change is, and then what are the organizations doing it, and who can help me assess those organizations. Instead, it's like a nice shiny object that we tend to give to sometimes.
I feel like that's where the governance and the mission statement probably are pretty helpful.
All that on a quantitative and a qualitative standpoint. Yeah.
Sorry, one last note on that. Let's say you have $100 to give away every year. Don't just give it to those who ask, because that's probably where your giving is going right now because your friend asked. Divide that $100 into categories and assign priorities and percentages to those categories at the year starts. So I'm going to give $20 to this cause, and then $5, much as a foundation would, but with your personal giving. And then you'll be much more disciplined, and your philanthropic dollars will actually go to the things that you care about.
That's very practical advice. That's very good advice. We have a perfect, excellent last wrap-up question. How do we access information on each of your work? How do we find you? How do we get more information about the work that you're doing?
I mean, I guess the website. Where else does anybody go these days to find out anything about anything? It's so yeah, absolutely. www.fiduciarytrust.com, and there we are. So I would start there anyway, and give us a call. We're happy to talk. Everybody loves to talk about themselves. Would love to talk about themselves.
I love hearing people talk about themselves, so I'm happy to get a call too. Although I think your tech people might tell you it should be https://. I've been told that by my tech people. Oh, yeah, www. You got to be careful with, but yeah. Anyway, you can find Fiduciary Trust online easily. You can find Angus Advisory Group online. You can find the Family Business Program at Columbia online. And I too love hearing people's stories, so feel free.
Yeah, great.
Theimpact.org. Per my other comments, I would encourage people to check out effectivealtruism.org.
Great. Well, thank you so much to our panel.
Thank you,
everyone. And thank you to the great audience. Thanks, guys.